So we're going to talk about setting up feature flags with React today. So I just want to start off by setting the stage a little bit. So let's say that I am a front-end developer and I'm working on this to-do list app. And right now, users only have the ability to add tasks to the list, but I want to add the ability to delete. And adding this feature requires some back-end work because we're going to need a new API endpoint. And I don't know if the back-end change is going to be ready at the same time as the front-end change. But here's what I've done so far. I have this conditional statement set, and by default, the user is not allowed to delete, right? So this is the current state. So if we allow you to delete, then we're going to render the delete button. And if not, we're going to render without delete. But by default, it's set to false. And then when I test this feature locally, I flip this Boolean to true. And then once the backend is ready and I want my users to be able to see the delete button, then I just push this with the commit with allow delete equal to true. And then that way users will be able to delete, right? And what's great about this is if there's any bugs with the backend API, it's relatively easy for me to temporarily roll back the release, right? So what I've created here is a super basic example of a feature flag. And a feature flag is basically a piece of conditional code that lets you separate code deployment from feature release. And there's a lot of different use cases. So the first use case, something that I'm really passionate about, is testing in production. So you use feature flags to target your internal users, test with those users in production, and then continue your deployment process. You can also use feature flags for A/B testing to figure out which version of a feature gives you a higher conversion rate. You can use them as a kill switch, which allows you to turn off a feature for everyone in case something goes wrong and you need to hide that feature. You can also use it for subscription management if you want to manage permissions for specific user groups. And then you can use feature flags to implement a Canary release. So this is also called a percentage rollout, where you only initially make available your feature to a small subset of users and then incrementally roll it out as you gain confidence in the feature. You can also use a feature flag management system to migrate your monolith to microservices. So there's a lot more, but I just wanted to go over what a feature flag is and how you would use it. And it's important because they improve your ability to develop, test, and deliver new features while minimizing risk throughout the process. And this just provides a good foundation for continuous delivery. And it has a really big impact. Using feature flags is how you can measure the impact of your changes because you can push information about the feature flags to your internal analytics system and then make business decisions off of that. So by using a feature flag management system, you can see, you're able to set who can see which feature without ever committing new code. And this is really great for product owners or maybe someone who's not technical, because they can control the user experience without having to ask the developers to commit new code. So again, I want to roll out this delete functionality in a controlled way using feature flags. And the basic feature flag thing that I had previously, that if-else statement, it was fine. But if I use a feature flagging system, I get more control and I can specifically say these people can see the flag and these people cannot. And I don't have to hard code anything and I don't have to change my source code. I can also target specific users or types of users. So I can segment a group of people and say, I want this group of people to see this new feature. And in Split, the possible states of what your user can see are called treatments. And for this demo app, the treatment controls who can delete tasks. So in our case, when the treatment is on, the user will be able to delete tasks. And when the treatment is off, the user will not be able to delete tasks. And this is kind of what it looks like in each case. So on the left, you can see I'm targeted and I see the delete button. Therefore, I'm able to delete tasks. And on the right, I'm not targeted. Therefore, I don't see the delete button and I'm not able to delete tasks. So what I had before, this if-else statement, this is a very hacky way to do this because, again, I'm hard coding whether or not the user can delete. And this is actually the right way to do it in React, where depending on the value of the prop, you're either going to show the delete button or not show it. So what we're going to do today is create a feature flag, install the dependencies, and configure a React app. We're going to instantiate and use the SDK, and then we're going to go over some best practices at the end. So the first step is to create the feature flag, and you do this by logging in to Split. So Split is one of the feature flagging frameworks. And basically after you log in, you'll see a button that says create your split, which is just another name for feature flag. You'll be prompted to enter some details about your flag. So enter a name, the traffic type. So the traffic type depends. It defines what differentiates the people who see your feature and the people who don't see your feature. So this can be by user, by location. So if you only want people in Europe to see this feature, or you only want people in a specific location. You can also differentiate by device. So if I only want Android users to see this feature, or only iOS users, or anything like that, this is where you kind of define that. And so in my example, I'm saying I want myself and developers to be able to delete, and everyone else is going to get the default existing behavior of only being able to add tasks. Okay, so next we need to install dependencies and configure our app. It's just one step. So after you create your React app with Create React App, there's just one dependency that you need in your root folder, and this is all in our documentation as well. And now we're going to instantiate and use the SDK. So this is the fun part. So the first thing you need to do is import the JavaScript SDK. And at the top of your component, you want to import SplitTreatments and with Split Factory from Split. So SplitTreatments is a React component that performs feature evaluation. And we're going to use this in our render function. And then the with Split Factory higher order component is used to wrap the to-do list component when I export it. So I split up my render function in two. And in the first one, I return the treatment and configuration from SplitTreatments. And in the names prop, I pass in the name of my feature flag that I created from the UI. And just note that this must exactly match the name that you inputted when you created your split. So just make sure that that matches, because I've run into some problems where I had an underscore or something and it didn't work. So, and then in the second render function, I created a variable named allow_delete that differentiates between treatment on and off. So again, if the treatment's on, you allow the users to delete, and if the treatment's off, then there is no option to delete. And then I have a function called create tasks that gets called in my render function and conditionally renders the delete button if the allow_delete variable is set to true. And then after the render functions, I insert the configuration that I'm going to use to configure my split instance. And what this does is it initializes with Split Factory, which is the entry point of the library. And what's important here is that each user is going to have their own authentication key, which you can find in the UI. And the key parameter is telling Split who the current user is. So in this case, when I run npm start, I'm going to see the delete button because I'm targeted in the feature flag. And then when I set debug to true, I'm able to see all of the logs from Split in the browser console. So I want you to pay attention to two things here. So the first is that you can clearly see I'm the person who's getting the treatment. And the second is you can see that the treatment is set to on for me. So because the treatment's on, you can see on the right that I'm able to delete tasks, and I see the delete button. And then now watch what happens when you change the key to a test user who's not in the split. The delete buttons disappear. And this is because the user is not targeted. This user is test user at split.io. This person is not targeted. Therefore, they go to the default, which is off. So notice in the console logs, I clearly see the treatment is off. And now I'm getting the default or existing behavior because I'm logged in as someone who's not targeted. So let's go through some best practices. And there's basically 4 parts of the feature flag lifecycle, and we're going to go through each part. So the first part is creation. So the first step in feature flag creation is creating a consistent naming convention. And there's a few options that you can choose from. So you can include the ticket number if you use like Jira or Asana. You can include the name of the service, the name of the team, the name of the functionality, like what is this feature flag being used for? You should also engage with the different stakeholders on your team to define something that makes sense for all of your teammates, and just be sure that there's clear ownership when you create this flag to reduce friction later on. And then just remember, like, consistency is key. So if you start out with one naming convention, be sure to keep that consistency throughout your project to avoid confusion. The next step is implementation. So changes to your feature flags should be treated like code deploys. So if you require 2 code reviews for your code base before someone gets to merge their code into master, you should also have 2 reviews for any configuration changes being made to your feature flags, because even though you're not making code changes and you're not writing code in the feature flag system itself, the changes you make here directly impact your users in production. So you just want to be really careful. By having this approval process, you can prevent people from making a change to the configuration of a flag that they don't own or that they meant to make for a different flag. And this prevents mistakes that could have been solved by using these approval flows. It's also a good idea to move your flagging decisions to the server side rather than the client side. And this does 3 things. So the first is that single page applications are already making a server side call to render the data for your UI. You could also make a call to a feature flag service at the same time, so that one network call fetches all the feature flag evaluations with the server side data. And then if you have to kill a feature for some reason, like, how would your client side feature flagging system find out? Like, would you poll for updates? Like, what would you do? And then you want to keep your decisions on the server, because it helps you reduce the challenges of cache invalidation, and keeping your decisions on the server helps to reduce the complexity of the feature flagging system. So those are the recommendations for making your decisions on the server side. And then you also don't want to change the scope of your components just to support feature flagging decisions. So your flagging decisions should be encapsulated as much as possible while making your flagging decisions as close to the logic as you can. So you don't need every part of your code base to be aware of every component, right? And then in terms of testing, I would work with your product owner and figure out what combination of flags brings you the most business, like what is the most important combination for you to test. And then once you have that list, you can use your automation users and target them inside whatever combination of flags that you need to validate your test cases. And then the next step is rollout. So the most important thing when you roll out a feature using feature flags is that increasing exposure to a feature should not affect the current exposed population. So if user A sees a feature when the feature is only at 10% rollout, then they should continue to see that feature even as you roll out to a higher percentage. So you should have this consistency with your users and build this consistency so that users have the same experience. You also want to build a feedback loop. So the great thing about feature flags is that they allow you to make controlled changes to your system. So you can observe the impact of your changes and then make adjustments as necessary. So if you turn on a feature flag for half of your population and your metrics are showing a decrease in activity, then you should kill that feature and adjust as necessary. But on the flip side, if the metrics show a higher conversion rate, then you want to keep the change and roll it out to everyone. So it's important to use the data from your feature flagging system to measure if you can move from a smaller percentage rollout to a bigger percentage rollout or vice versa. And then you want to set up alerts to page you when you get any statistically significant changes. So if your business metrics are being really badly impacted by any change, you should be getting more violent alerts through PagerDuty or whatever application you use. And then on the flip side, if you get like neutral or positive results, maybe just set up like an email alert or like something a little bit less aggressive. And then the last step of the feature flagging lifecycle is cleanup. So you definitely don't want to be stuck with 100 feature flags that have already served their purpose and then were just forgotten about. So something super useful you can do when thinking about removing a flag is to assign an expiration date for the flag. And then you can also set up alerts that will poke you when a flag is stale and say, hey, like this flag hasn't had impressions in a while, it might be time to delete it. Another helpful thing to do is to add a subtask to your backlog to retire the flag at the same time that the flag is created. So when you create the ticket in your backlog to create the flag, make sure you also create a ticket to delete the flag. And this all happens once you reach your definition of done. And of course, you want to make sure that you remove the old code when you delete the feature flag, because you don't want to have stale code in your code base. And that's it. So basically, you've implemented a feature flag with React and learned the best practices. So in the future, you could use this feature flag configuration to deploy all of your changes in a controlled manner. So in a percentage rollout or Canary release, you could also deploy to production while keeping the flag off by default, and then test the feature in production with those specific users and ensure functionality. And then once you know it works with them, you could increase the percentage allocation. And you could release this incrementally to users all at once, or all at once without any code changes. And then I also want to give you guys some useful links. So I have a video on feature flag maintenance that kind of reviews everything we talked about today. You can also try feature flagging for free if you go to split.io, and then a link to this repo that has all the code that I talked about today. And then again, I'm Talia. I'm a dev advocate at Split. This is my Twitter, my email.